So today we're going to talk about how we can use what we have looked at for the last 2 weeks. Quadratic formula along with factoring cubes. So the first question, how can we use factoring techniques to solve higher order polynomials? Well, first of all, cubic polynomial. That means that it's a degree of 3. And the thing is, the degree is related to how many solutions we'll have. So if the degree is 3, there's going to be 3 solutions. And let's look at how this works. So first of all, we're going to take this x cubed minus 27 equals 0. And we're going to start by solving. And in order to solve, we need to factor first. So that goes back to the little parentheses and the big parentheses. Remember, I don't have access to a calculator. But the cube root of x cubed is x. The cube root of 27 is 3. And then x cubed divided by x. We had 3 x's, we took out 1, we've got 2. 27 divided by 3 is 9. And the last part, take this and this, the x and the 3, and multiply them together. Now we can apply the SOAP. Same sign. Well, it's a minus in our original problem. Then the opposite of that minus sign is a plus sign. There's the O, always positive here. So now, if you recall, that was equal 0. It says step 2, set each factor equal to 0. So we're going to set x minus 3 equal to 0. And we're going to set x squared plus 3x plus 9 equal to 0. And this setup on the left here, the x minus 3 equals 0, we can solve. And we get x equals 3. But over here on the right, we need to use the quadratic formula to solve. And I'm going to flip over to the next page so I have enough room to write. So again, we've got x squared plus 3x plus 9 equals 0. And if you remember from the quadratic formula, that means that a equals 1, b equals 3, and c equals 9. And we're going to fill in the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. The thing is, I don't have a calculator, but what we did is we figured out the value underneath the square root with our calculator. But remember, if you've got your calculator right there, it's going to be negative 3 plus or minus. You still leave the square root in. And when you type that in, you end up with negative 27 divided by 2. But eventually what we're trying to find is we're trying to find 2 more answers for a total of 3 answers to this entire problem because it's a cubed problem. And now what we have to do is we have to simplify the square root of negative 27. So we're going to simplify the square root of negative 27. Remember that the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 27. And the square root of negative 1, whoops, the square root of negative 1 is I. So we've got I 27. When we break this down, this is 9 times 3, which is 3 times 3. And by the way, simplify the square root the way your algebra teacher taught you to do this. But now we've got 3 times 3 times 3. And we need 2 of the same to take out 1. So 2 of the same here to take out 1. So this means that when we simplify this, we're going to have 3. Don't forget the I, square root of 3. And now, when we look at this is going to be negative 3 plus or minus 3i square root of 3 over 2, which are our final two answers. I'm going to try to add a page in here just to look at what the three answers are to this one. By the way, I and other Algebra 2 teachers are perfectly happy with you writing your solution like that. Again, here comes a new page. If you remember, what we ended up with, first of all, is we ended up with x equals 3. And then if you're a very literal person, because we're supposed to have 3 solutions to this problem, what happens is that the other two solutions are negative 3 plus 3i square root of 3 over 2 and negative 3 minus 3i square root of 3 over 2. You can write them in combined form like we had on the previous page. So let's look at a couple more here. If we look at x cubed plus 125 equals 0, our starting point is that we want a factor. So we're going to do our little parentheses and our big parentheses. And the cube root of x cubed is x. The cube root of 125 is 5. And then x cubed divided by x is x squared. 125 divided by 5 is 25. And then we're going to multiply x and 5 together to get the 5x and put in the SOAP. Same sign. So what we were given is a plus. Opposite sign, always positive. And once we've got that, then we're going to take the x plus 5 and set it equal to 0, and the x squared minus 5x plus 25 and set it equal to 0. And we can find the solution with this left-hand part here by subtracting 5 from both sides. And we get x equals negative 5. But once again, what we have to do is we have to use the quadratic formula on this part. So let's take x squared minus 5x plus 25 and use the quadratic formula. That means that a is 1, b is negative 5, and c is 25. And again, I hope you have your calculator nearby. But we're going to fill this in. So x equals the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus, I'm going to have to erase here for a second so I've got enough space, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Use your calculator to figure out what goes underneath the square root. And I think I can squeeze it in here to the right, but double negative, let me change color here for a second. Double negative gives us a positive. So this is going to become 5 plus or minus. When you type this in, we end up with the square root of negative 75 divided by 2. I'm trying to leave myself a little bit of space here because just like the previous problem, we're going to have to simplify the square root of negative 75. And the square root of negative 75, we have to do the square root of negative 1 and the square root of 75. The square root of negative 1 is I, and then we have 75. We're going to make our factor tree. Do 25 times 3, and then 5 times 5. So I can carry down the 3. A little bit better space on this problem. And what we're looking for, again, is we're looking for 2 of the same to take out 1. And 2 of the same to take out 1 is going to leave us with 5i square root of 3. Don't forget that I. So when we put this back into the problem here, what we end up with then is we're going to end up with 5 plus or minus 5i radical 3 all divided by 2. But again, a reminder, we Algebra 2 teachers are perfectly fine with you writing those two answers like that. As I add a page in, I just want to write down the fact that we're looking for 3 solutions. And if you look back at your paper, you can see them easier, but the first one we came up with was x equals -5. And then our next 2 answers, if you're very literal, are 5 plus 5i square root of 3 over 2, and I can't squeeze it in beside, but 5 minus 5i square root of 3 over 2. So you get the hang of things here. We're going to make it a little bit harder on our next problem, only because, as you see on this particular problem, what's happening is that we've got an 8x cubed plus 27 this time. But as we take a look, we're still going to start it off the same way. By the way, we're looking to find eventually 3 solutions because our exponent in this problem is a 3. But as we go back here, we start with factoring. The little parentheses and the big parentheses. Cubed root of 8 is 2. Cubed root of x cubed is x. Cubed root of 27 is 3. 8x cubed divided by 2x. 8 divided by 2 is 4. We had 3 x's. We took out 1. We have 2. 27 divided by 3 is 9. Then we're going to take the 2x times the 3 to get the 6x, and we'll put our signs in. Same sign, opposite sign, always positive. And once again, we can take the 2x plus 3 and set it equal to 0. But we're also going to take the 4x squared minus the 6x plus the 9 and set it equal to 0. So when we solve here to the left, we get 2x equals -3, and divide both sides by 2. So x equals -3/2, running out of space there. And now what we have to do is we have to use the quadratic formula on this part. So I'll flip over to another page so we've got enough space. 4x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. And when we identify here the fact that a is 4, the number in front of the x squared term, b is -6, and c is 9, we're going to fill those values into the quadratic formula. So write those down because I may have to erase them again. But what we're going to do, fill it in. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared. And here comes my erasing. Minus b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. And when you type that in the calculator, again, just a reminder over here that those two negatives give us a positive, but we're going to get 6 plus or minus the square root. When you type in negative 6 squared minus 4 times 9, we get negative 108 divided by 8. So now what we have to do, like on the previous problems, is we have to simplify the square root of negative 108. And like the previous problems, we're going to have the square root of negative 1, and then the square root of 108. The square root of negative 1 is I, and 108, I did 4 times 27. Those are not your only choices, but 4 is 2 times 2, and 27 is 9 times 3, which is 3 times 3. I'm going to carry all these down because what we're looking for is we're looking for 2 of the same to take out 1. So we've got 2 2s, we can take out 1 2. 2 3s, we can take out 1 3. And when we do, what we end up with here is we end up with 2 times 3 I. Don't forget the I, square root of 3, which ultimately equals 6I, square root of 3. 2 times 3 is the 6. So over here in this particular problem, we get 6 plus or minus 6I, square root of 3, all divided by 8, which is an answer that we accepted earlier on in the year, and I think that we will still accept it now. But I do just want to show you that notice that 6 and 6 and 8 are all divisible by 2. So really what we could do is we could simplify this by taking 6 divided by 2, and we get 3. Plus or minus 6I divided by 2 is 3I, square root of 3. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. And as I add in here what we ended up with in terms of our 3 solutions, once again, is that we ended up with x equals negative 3/2, and then our other answer here of x equals 3 plus or minus 3I radical 3 over 4. That is 2 solutions. You can break them apart if you really see the word 3 and you want 3 answers written down. So hopefully by now you're getting the hang of things, but I do have one more example in case you need it. And as we take a look at this, once again, we're going to factor. So that means our little parentheses and our big parentheses. And I need to make that font just a little bit bigger here. Cubed root of 64 is 4. Cubed root of x cubed is x. Cubed root of 1 is 1. 64x cubed divided by 4x is 16x squared. We had 3 x's, we took out 1, we've got 2. 1 divided by 1 is 1, and then we're going to take 4x times 1 is 4x, and then we can put in our signs. Same sign as what we're given in the problem. Opposite sign of what we're given in the problem. Always positive. And then we take the 4x minus 1 and set it equal to 0, and the 16x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. We are looking for 3 solutions. If I can write the word. Sorry about that. But we can add 1 to both sides. We can get that answer right away. We get 4x equals 1, and divide both sides by 4. So we get x equals 1/4. But once again, we need to use the quadratic formula to finish that. And sorry, I don't have the quadratic formula on that next page. I forgot to put it on there, but we'll be okay. So we've got 16x squared plus 4x plus 1. And then what we know is that A is 16, B is 4, and C is 1. And again, you may need to write that down real quick before I erase it. But we're going to fill in the quadratic formula. X equals negative B, the opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. When we simplify this, we get x equals negative 4 plus or minus. Typing that into the calculator, we get the square root of negative 48 divided by 32. And once again, what we have to do is we have to simplify the square root of negative 48. And it's going to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 48. The square root of negative 1 is I. And then when we break down 48, I did 16 times 3, which is 4 times 4 times 3. And I'm just going to kind of cheat a little bit because we need 2 of the same to take out 1. We've got 2 4s right there. So we can take out 1. So we get 4i square root of 3 when we simplify that square root of negative 48. So we can put that back in and we get negative 4 plus or minus 4i square root of 3 divided by 32. And again, Algebra 2 teachers are fine with that answer, but notice that we can simplify that a little bit here, and I'm going to have a tight squeeze when I'm writing it. But 4 and 32 are all divisible by 4. So this is the same thing as negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1. 4i divided by 4 is 1i. And no, you don't have to write the 1 there, but I'm going to. And then it's square root of 3. And then 32 divided by 4 is 8. So it's not written very well, but I'll try to fix it up a little bit. Negative 1 plus or minus 1i square root of 3 over 8. And as we finish here, then what are our 3 solutions? Our 3 solutions, the first one we came up with is that x equals 1/4. And then our next 2 solutions were the negative 1 plus or minus 1i square root of 3 over 8.